So now it is demo time. I am super excited. We're going to go ahead and install Active Directory to create a brand new forest. So here we are. I have logged in to my Windows 2016 server, and I am ready to move forward with installing Active Directory. So the first step that you'll need to take is you'll need to make sure Server Manager is open. Now typically with a fresh login, this would be front and center for you. Next, we're going to click Add Roles and Features, and we're going to click Next. This is just informational. Here we're going to choose role-based or feature-based installation. This is just simply used for adding roles, services, and features. Click Next. This is just telling us a little bit more about our server. And so really it's just reiterating the name and IP address of the server we're using. Click Next. And then here's where the fun begins. So in order to install Active Directory, we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need the Active Directory domain services. When I check that box, it pops up with an Add Features. We'll go ahead and do that. And then we're also going to leverage DNS. So I'm going to go ahead and check that box and click Add Features. Now, this is a lab environment, so it is not set up with any form of a static IP, which is actually really an ideal situation when you're installing DNS. But again, this is a lab, so I'm going to let this slide. Click Continue, and then click Next. Outside of this, there are no additional features that we need, so we'll click Next. Here is an informational note about Active Directory domain services. They also are promoting Azure Active Directory. We don't need to select anything here outside of clicking Next. Again, a little bit more information. In this case, it's about DNS. Feel free to read this at your leisure. As we continue through this, I'm going to just click Next. Now on this screen, I'm going to go ahead and check the box that allows this server to reboot. It will require a reboot, so we're going to say yep. That way we don't have to do it manually. It'll just automatically occur. When it's ready, click Install. Now I would expect that this will take some time. In my experience, it hasn't taken more than typically about 10 minutes. You may experience something different depending on the infrastructure you're installing Active Directory on. You may have selected hardware, it may be virtual, whatever the case may be. Just plan on this taking a little bit of time. So our installation has completed, and there's still another step that you need to take in order for this to become a domain controller. You can see it here in the middle of the screen where it talks about requiring the fact that we need to promote this to a domain controller. So I went ahead and clicked on Promote this server to a domain controller, and it brings up this wizard here. Now, as I mentioned, this is a brand new forest. From here, we'll need to give our domain a name. I'm going to go ahead and call this miller.com. Make sure you include the .com, otherwise this will not advance. Once this is complete, click Next. So for this particular screen, the domain controller options, you need to consider a couple of things. One, you need to take a look at the versions of Windows operating system you have in your organization. If you are running 2008 or 2008 R2 or 2012 or 2012 R2, you'll need to choose the oldest server version you are running in your environment. If you have the luxury of starting completely fresh, like your lab environment, you could then choose Windows 2016. So take a look at what you have. If you have Windows Server 2008 and Windows 2012 R2, you need to choose Windows 2008. For this particular example, I'm going to leave it at Windows 2016. Now, as for the domain functional level, that would actually be Windows 2016 in this particular new forest. Next, we're going to give our domain controller its capabilities. So for ours, we made it a DNS server and a global catalog server. A little bit more information on the DNS role. In a lab environment, it's perfectly okay to run DNS on your domain controller. Honestly, it can run on a domain controller in production as well. However, security strategies have us now working toward putting DNS on its own server. So again, just a production thing to consider. All right, I'm going to go ahead. This directory services restore mode is just a password you need to remember. So fill in any password, but make sure you know what it is. Once that's all complete, click Next. Now, in terms of this particular warning with the DNS, this is not unusual for a lab environment. We haven't done a lot of heavy config. We're not hard coding our server IPs and things like that. And so I would typically just bypass this for the lab. In production, this would be a problem, but in terms of what we need to do for this lab, it is completely okay to proceed as is. So click Next. All right, now it'll take just a moment to bring up the NetBIOS domain name, but NetBIOS domain names are the 8-character referenced domain name that gets stored behind the scenes. Typically, you won't use this too much in your adventures, but it is important to the install. Click Next. Now, in terms of Active Directory, there are 3 core components. You have the database folder, the log files folder, and the sysvol. Typically, you would leave these on the C drive of your domain controller. So I'm not going to change these, and I'm going to click Next. Now, in terms of this screen, it really is just a review of all of the different settings. And if you're really interested in automating additional installs of Active Directory, you can grab this script by choosing View Script. And you can save this and keep this, and it will help you with automating any future deployments with PowerShell. Once complete, click Next. Now it's going to verify all the prerequisites before we can proceed. I am expecting some DNS warnings. Again, this is a lab environment without DNS heavily configured. In production, that would be a huge problem. So as I mentioned, there are a few warnings. I'm not going to spend time on them. We did pass our prerequisite checks, so next step is install. Again, nothing there was going to prevent us from installing Active Directory in our lab environment. So this will also take a little bit of time. It's just checking on a few things. You can see toward the top of the screen here how it's working through the different install components. That's how you can kind of measure the progress. I would expect this portion of the install also to take probably around 10 minutes or so. You won't see that here. I am going to go ahead and pause the video while it does its work. All right, when it's complete, because we told it it could reboot, it's signing me out and it's going to restart the system. Once the server has rebooted and you can log in again, and this will also take some time, the server will not be responsive or available until it's done doing the installs. But then when you come back online, if updates are required, it's going to pop this up for you. So I'm going to go ahead and do Get Updates. So if you experience the updates in your lab, feel free to take advantage of that and install them. If not, this is okay as well. It could just be that my lab environment didn't have all the updates. When those updates are complete, let's verify that Active Directory has been successfully installed. So to do that, we're going to the Start button. We're going to go ahead and scroll down in the menu, and you'll notice that new on your menu is the Windows Administrative Tools. If you click that, we now have the multiple Active Directory-based options available, and I'm going to go ahead and open Active Directory Users and Computers. And what you can see here is I now have a Miller.com domain with all the base accounts and computer objects, if there were any, listed. So that completes this particular lab portion.